great honor. It's a pleasure to be here once again, and it's an honor to talk to you people, and you give me the opportunity to share these few days with you. And I may not have all answers. I have maybe none of them, but I could relate to you my experience, our little knowledge, if there is any, about this pasture growing and finishing. And having said that, I will also was testing if you understand my English. Is it somewhat understandable? Okay, if you don't understand it, just raise your hand and I can try again, maybe in Spanish. And then you will understand. Some of you may translate better than I speak. Anyway, with these 2 days or 2 days and a half, we thought that it would be best for us to start in the opposite way or the reverse of most of the common approaches when we talk about pastures and cattle. Most of the time, we, the agronomists, start talking about the pastures, the forage, the grass, and then we talk about what we put on them to graze, to harvest this forage. And that's why you are grass farmers. But I think now for this school and this of your interest in finishing, we have to do it the reverse. We need to talk a little bit about the animal first. And that has to do with this product that you are trying to market or sell or produce at least. And then all these products will have different needs, different requirements. And then we can think now with our resources how we can meet these requirements. Does it make any sense? Yeah. You know, if you put an animal in a feed yard and a feed lot, you already know. You have a picture of what kind of animal you're targeting for, how fat, how heavy or whatever. And then you feed that and adjust the diet to that animal. So let's, for the sake of these 2 days, just do that. Instead of working from the pastures and how we can manage the pastures and all that, we will talk about that tomorrow. But let's for a few hours talk about these animals that we are thinking that we can produce or we would like to produce. And that's sometimes the most challenging part of it, because many of us don't really know exactly what kind of animal we're looking for. Do you all know what you want? What is this grass-fed or pasture-finished steer that you're looking for? And that's when we come to this number of attributes that we would like to have, and you list your attributes and you say, I want the animal to be grass-fed in an organic system, and I want it to be part of the landscape. It has to be right, it has to look pretty, and it has to make me money. And with a least amount of work. And that's a lot to ask. So at home I can't do a lot together. The lazy part I do. I try to work the least amount of hours. And then I let the animal to do the rest of the work. But most of us talk about all the time about tenderness. I want it to be predictable. We want to sell tenderness to our consumers, to our people. And we say many times that the natural way to do it is going to create tenderness. And that's not exactly right. Nature didn't plan for tenderness. Maybe they were tender. Maybe the wild animals are tender. Maybe deer is tender. Sometimes they're not any tender at all. So tenderness is, well, there you go. Come on. Doesn't want to let me lie. Tenderness is something that we work for and we develop in the system as much as we can, because we think our consumers would like something that should be tender. Leanness, but marble. What's that? We need a little bit of marbling in that meat. People appreciate the flavor, the experience of that marbling provides, the fat with a little bit of a flavor in it. But most of this beef is going to be lean. It's very hard to produce or it's difficult to produce a fat steer, or a steer that would look like a steer that comes from a feed yard, from a feedlot, off of grass. Grass has a limit, energy-wise. It's not concentrated. It's not concentrated in energy, so we always will be working towards more energy in the grass, increasing the rate of gain, increasing the rate of fat deposition, but most of us will not end up with an overfat steer. Sometimes we do, or a heifer, but it's not going to be always the case. So overfattening an animal may not be our risk.
Anibal.
Yes.
A lot of people are going through trying to find where you are in the book.
Okay,
so
that's
let me tell you, just trust us that it's in the book.
It's a grass. It's a.
And just relax and enjoy.
There is after. It says grass-finished beef by Anibal Pordomingo. The first question says, to what extent is fattening needed on grass-fed? After a couple of articles.
It's all in there, so just don't
yes.
worry about it.
Don't worry about it. It's there, and it's written in a way that you will understand what I said when you read it. I hope. Anyway, we would like to be predictable. Most of us would like that meat to have a color that will be appreciated by the consumer, some flavor and juiciness. And that's all related to this degree of finishing. I will show you later a few pieces of data in more detail, but there's always a discussion in our research how fat or how what finishing means and how fat these animals should be to call them finished. And is fatness and marbling related to tenderness? And we will find out that until a certain extent, to a point, that finishing and that degree of fatness, that fat level, it is slightly associated to tenderness. But after 3.4%, 3.5%, 4% of fat, intramuscular fat, after that point, increasing fatness does not improve tenderness. Most likely, tenderness is related to connective tissue, to struggle, to the harsh and easy times that an animal had through its life, more than anything. It's connective tissue, it's muscle work, more than degree of fat or fatness. We will talk about that. You would also talk about these nutraceutical properties, these healthy attributes of meats, and we need to know that there is a boundary, there is a frame to it. We're not talking salmon here. We're not talking fish, or we're not talking wild salmon. It's beef, okay? So we don't have to get confused. There is a limit to it, but there are some nice things about the properties of having more antioxidants in this meat. Like Alan said, the carotenes, vitamin E, they're associated to green growing grasses. So the more the animals are exposed to green growing grass, the greater the chances of having more carotenes and vitamins in the fat, the lipid soluble ones, the fat soluble ones. Most likely the chances of having more minerals in that meat will be there. And all these nice things, the omega-3s, and we will talk about that. But again, we're talking about beef, not fish, okay? So don't want to get over the board with those nutritional aspects of beef. You may want to label your meat many of you relate a story to it or link a story to your beef. Then there is another attribute that we have to work with, and all these are constraints to our program. So we want, like I said, if we want them all at once, the program becomes difficult. Let's say they want to be organic, then we keep increasing our restrictions here. Producing organic beef is not simple because the forage and the forages that we're using, supplements, store feeds, all have to be produced in an organic way. So all these things are nice, but maybe not all of them could be introduced at once. Yes, sir.
We just killed a beef, I think it was about a little over a year old. There is zilch marbling in it, and very little outside fat. So is that steak there, is that more than a year old or 2 years old? Or
It's about 18 months old.
18 months old. And it will marble like that?
Yes, and even more than this. I have this steak here because it shows several things. There is marbling in here, but this is a little fat with lots of connective tissue. So this is not exactly fat, okay? The fatness, the marbling, is like a little dots, little spots in here, not this.
The streaks.
Yes. Okay. So let's not get confused with that. I have this steak here. It is fairly marbled, but and has a very good back fat thickness here. But there's little like lightlings here. You know, this is a little more connective tissue than fat.
But in the USDA, they have they have their ranges of fat.
Yes.
Slightly abundant.
This could be like low choice
Okay.
to high stand, low choice. So again, we're working towards, like I said, all these nice things to have. The more of them we want, low omega-6, omega-3 ratio. That's very, very consistent attribute. Most of this grass-fed, pasture-finished beef will have a low omega-6, omega-3 ratio and fairly high CLA depending on the forage base. Like I said, carotenes could be 2 or 3 times more than the confinement-fed steer. And for all of this are related to the diet and the forage that we're exposing the animals to. We call it the forage chain. A chain is a sequence of forages. Many of you may have the opportunity of having one pasture, one forage year round, but not everybody. So in my part of the world, we have to sequence forages, link them like in a chain to make the animals grow through a stalker and then the finishing phase or fattening phase. Let's get to some of this data that I was talking about. I don't want to overload you with data, but let's just look at the proportions here. This is 100% pasture. These animals were finished on pasture. They never had they weren't exposed to any grain or anything from weaning. We look at the CLAs. This is 0.6 here, less than 1% in that intermuscular fat. On milligrams of every 100 grams of muscle, that means 15.7. This is doubling what we have here on a grain-based or corn silage-based finishing phase. So that pretty much says what you know already from most of your readings, that CLAs, that desirable fatty acid, that by the way, it's an omega-6 fatty acid, it's not an omega-3. You got to know that, because we all like the omega-3s, but some of these omega-6s are not too bad. This is one of them. Anyway, this is low here, and like you know, it's doubled here. In some other research in the world has shown that you could triple that. But most of the time, that's where you end up. Here we have pastures, the same thing, pastures, finishing the animals on pastures, but they were supplemented with grain. And as long as this pasture was green and growing, see how forgiving it is. We dropped, adding the grain, we changed the ruminant environment a little bit. So the production of this CLA was not that efficient, and the overall proportions dropped. We can see them here, they dropped a little bit compared to these proportions in this intramuscular fat. But it's actually higher than on finishing these animals on this silage or corn diets. There's another interesting thing here, or figure, that we're looking at proportions here on intramuscular fat. These numbers look the same, but if we know that this pasture finishing has a little more fat than these animals here, on an absolute basis, milligrams, this was higher than these two. You see what I mean? A proportion in the fat may say something or may say nothing, depending on how much fat or intramuscular fat we have in that beef. Okay? Well, of course, these were low. And this ratio, omega-6, omega-3, this is what most of us look at first, because this is the most stable indicator. If we are below 4, if we are 3 to 1, we're talking of a desirable ratio. Most of the grass-fed or pasture-finished beef is in a ratio of 2 to 1 or lower. This one right here says 1:04. That's 1 to 1. The same amount of omega-3, as omega-6. That gives us a 1 to 1. Are you with me on this? This is a 7.6 to 1. This is 6.5 to 1. And this supplemented pastures gave us a 2 to 1. So if we had to discriminate grass from grain-fed beef, this is a very good chemical analysis that we could use. And I can show you research all over the world that is happening in Europe, here in the States, down in South America, that come up with the same, always ends up with the same sort of ratio. The older the animals get, more fat, we may see a slightly higher ratio, closer to 3 to 1, but 2 to 1, but never 8 or 5 to 1 or above. Is that? Okay, what else is here? Regarding the saturated fats, the numbers are pretty much similar. So what we're dealing here is the ratio among the unsaturated fats, the ones that we want. In some pieces of research show that maybe not here, but in some other research they found slightly less saturated fats in grass-fed or pasture-finished beef. Not in this piece of research that I'm showing here. This is a compiled list of trials that we did at home. Many people there did, actually, more than some of us. Some of us were involved here. Look at the same thing here: omega-6, omega-3, and CLAs. These were feedlot finished or based on corn, 14 to 1. And these were alfalfa pasture, 100%, 2 to 1. This was a supplemented one once again, 3.5, 4.5. So again, the pasture is very forgiving. It's but it has to be a green growing pasture. And I keep saying that because otherwise we won't see that response.
In other words, hay and silage wouldn't produce that same.
Exactly. We may not get to 14 to 1 with hay or silage, but we could be 5. It won't help us to wash effects that we don't want. Or if you don't not really into this, don't claim a low omega-6, omega-3 ratio. So that's why I started saying we need to know what we're targeting for, what we're trying to sell. We may not be able to sell everything at once. The high CLA story we have to be careful about, because CLAs, how they change a lot. And if we say high CLA, what is a high CLA? It's more than 1%. Is it 0.6? Is it 0.8? And it changes. It varies between animals, among animals, and from season to season and year to year. So don't sell something that is going to be 0.6, 0.7 CLA, Or let's say don't sell something that's 1% CLA and you end up with something that selling that something that is 0.7 CLA. The omega-6, omega-3 ratio then is more reliable. You can really rely on what you're doing.
Where do you get that information? I mean,
This is the research that we did down in Argentina, but out of Clemson you have similar research.
They want to get it on their own meat.
no, I mean, you go to a lab or something?
Oh yes. The people at Clemson do that for you.
Oh, okay.
Yes, as a service. And I think
Is
did
it
I?
expensive to have them do it?
No, I don't think so. At home, it costs about less than $100 to do it. But it takes a time. It takes a little while. They have to run a GC analysis with the gas chromatography. It takes a little while. You have to send the sample. They have to dry it and grind it and do a few things with it. Extract the fat and run that through a chromatographer. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you need to do it frequently. You might want to try it for if you are starting this. But after a while, I think you're going to be repeating the same story over and over. Here, 8:1. Look at this level of CLA here. It's pretty low, but higher than this. And we're talking of lighter cattle. So it's like I said, maybe the older they get, maybe they get a little more saturated. The omega-6 tend to increase. This number is higher than that, and maybe because they're lighter. Here they have a heavier steer in this study, and we've seen a lower level CLA. But again, all these ratios, all these animals were supplemented here. See, they were supplemented at 1.3% of body weight. And even with that level of supplement, there was a grain supplement, the ratios were pretty low. So what am I saying here? Am I saying you go ahead and supplement? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you have a protocol that requires no supplement, just respect that and you try to finish with that. But there is nothing wrong maybe if you have a different protocol and you have to add supplements in there. You'll be within the omega-6, omega-3 ratio while the pastures are good quality.